This is the second episode of Beers with Baelnorn. Last time I was using Milwaukee's Best cheap get you drunk beer. This time I'm doing Polliner, my favorite brand. Their Hefeweizen is my favorite beer, I think. Right now I'm drinking the Oktoberfest Munchen, and it's pretty good. So if you have beers or cider or mead or just anything, drink along with me. And if you have questions unrelated to the topic at hand, feel free to ask them. I will try to answer every question I see. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can post your questions in the comments, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. So we're going to be going over world building, two things. One, the initial approach for world building, and two, quest basics. This is a very heavy design philosophy, so it's more of a game design class. So some of the stuff can apply to RPG campaigns, writing books, even just like making your a battle game. Some of the principles could apply to that, but we'll be focusing mostly on LARP style quests. But as I said, it translates pretty well to any kind of creative medium where you're telling a story. There are two basic approaches I take to world crafting, the macro approach and the micro approach. Really, these are the only two basic approaches you can take. They can be mix and match, and you can approach it with different levels of both approaches. If you're doing it on your own, you'll figure out what works best for you. So I'll go over the approaches, and then I will talk about my approach to world building, which will apply to the concepts for quests. So just bear with me a little bit. So going a little bit off topic of quests at the moment, but it's part of the world building series on my articles that I've written. So the macro approach. Basically, you create the world from the inside out. This is a very methodical approach, and it can take some time to build up the world before you actually get into the story building aspect. So Lord of the Rings is a very good example. Tolkien did a whole bunch of world building stuff, legends, gods, histories, even some short stories about the heroes of past. So he created this whole unique, detailed world before he actually started writing the stories. That would be the macro approach. So you don't actually work on the story itself until you've created the world for which the story is situated. Now the micro approach is the exact opposite. To the extreme, basically you start in a small point and you work yourself outwards. It's more disorganized than the macro approach, and there is a much larger need to take notes than keep them organized because you're going to be haphazardly creating things. But you get to just jump right away into the story. So, for example, let's say you have a character concept that you would like to write a story for. Basically, you start writing the story right away, and as you encounter the hurdles that he or she or they encounter, you create the world around that conflict. So let's say they start from a small village. Basically, you might write a couple paragraphs about their upbringing, and then you might write some notes about the city that he was brought up in. And as you go through this telling the story of that character, you'll create the world around them. That is the micro approach. It's from inward out. Any questions about the two basic approaches to world building? I'll just wait here for a second, take a drink of my beer. Yes, I'm going to be getting into my approaches next. I just wanted to work out the basic two approaches in some generic detail. So I'll just go into that. I take different approaches based on the work that I'm working on. For story writing, I used to always take the approach that I have to build a world first. I have to write all these details and stuff like that to be able to situate my characters in a world. But I found that for me, I got really bogged down in these details, and I never ever actually got to writing the story itself. So the straight old school macro approach, like Lord of the Rings, that doesn't work for me. Let's see. Perfect. So yeah, as I said, it was an approach that I liked. Didn't work for me, so I moved on to trying other approaches. Let's see, for like how I approached the world creation is basically depends on what I'm doing. For Shattered Kingdoms, which is Amp Guard Campout that I run in Pacific Northwest, it's a roleplay centric campout. It's basically quests and themed battle games. So when I create the world for Shadow Kingdoms, I didn't try to create a whole world before creating the stories inside the world. I started on a specific detail and moved out. So I used two basic things, especially in the first several years: backgrounds for relics that we would auction off, in storylines. So the backgrounds for the relics, I would basically create like this a myth, just a couple paragraphs for the item that had like heroes or gods or talked about a kingdom or something like that, and then that would give me the inspiration to expand on that. And after a couple years, I set up a wiki to keep track of all these details. And then I built off the storylines from each year. Uh, so that would be basically I create my quests, and then those quests has a storyline, and then I would create the details from those storylines and move out and create a larger world. And now I wouldn't say it's the most filled out, but it's coming along really nicely. And that is taking the micro approach to world building and having it apply it to LARP. Now, for RPG campaigns, I start with the macro approach. I create a framework to work from. When I was writing, I was getting bogged down. I got bogged down in details, but I've learned to not let those details bother me and to create a broad framework for which to create a campaign. So I still use the micro approach when doing a campaign to fill in details. So I will, after I create the basic worlds, gods, uh, the basic magic principles, stuff like that. Um, a lot of times that is already created for me, which is convenient unless I'm doing my own special world. Then I focus on the campaign and where do I want the adventurers to start. So, like if I want them to start in a village, I'll work on creating the village in which they could start in, and that is the macro approach. And as they are going to be encountering another city or they're going to be encountering another group, I create the information for those characters in the city or in the group that they're going to encounter, and I expand upon that. Sometimes I'll jump out, work on something that's more a macro approach, and then go back into the micro approach. But mostly, after creating the framework, I use the micro approach to facilitate creating the various details in the world. So, any questions about my approaches or any um, thing that wasn't very clear? Take another drink of my beer. And like I said, this is can be taken for any kind of creative approach. I mean, art like pen and paper RPGs, LARPs, writing your own story. I mean, anything moderately creative, and you can apply if you really want to get into and adopt these two approaches. This can be done for any kind of work. Honestly, do you work on the nitty gritty details of the of your paper, or do you work on the larger concepts? It's really most people will mix and match how they approach a problem and then solve it to what they believe is the appropriate way to solve it. So there's no question about the macro approach and the micro approach and how it can apply to world building. We'll actually move on from world building and move into the quests. Then think about how the world building can apply to the quest building. It might help you come up with some ideas. For further reading, I have also covered these in my articles on my webpage, Baelnorn.com. You can find the world building series that talks about the initial or the world building initial approach. And now we're going to move into the other article, which is quest basics. And so this is a very systems heavy approach to quests and game design. So I will be breaking down into the basic quests. There's actually only 5 of them. As far as I can tell, I've worked on quests a lot, and I've talked to some people and that are pretty big into RPGs, and I broke down the quest to 5 basic quest categories that every quest can get narrowed down into. And as I said, I talked to people to try and break this 5 quest approach, and we couldn't think of anything. So if you think of anything while I'm talking, please post in the comments and I will address it. Because how I approach it, I think any quest that you have an idea for, I can probably break down into the 5 basic quest types. So we'll start with acquisition quests. These are quests where you go from one point, you acquire an item, and you return it to a location, or generally the person who asked the location to begin with. It's a very straight, simple fetch quest, effectively. And that is a large category. You can do lots of things with that, but they all break down into that same basic formula. The second is delivery quests, which are similar to acquisition quests, but not the same. It's when you take an object or objects to a place or various places. And in this case, most often you do not have to find the object, but you, in some cases, might have to, but that gets into, we'll cover quest modifiers a little bit later. So the next topic is defend quests. Also very basic. These are all basic. It's when you have to defend an object, an area, or a person. So let's say you're in a castle and your quest is to defend it. That would be the defend quest. If you have to go to, maybe you have a person you have to protect while they're, so they don't die. That'd be a defend quest. The next is the exact opposite, attack quests. And this is not killing someone. This is attacking a location. Killing people is a different type of quest. Attack quests are probably the most straightforward out of all of them, that are the least complicated. Because it's generally just like attack an area, like attack the keep, or something like that. Now, the 5th quest is a disable quest. And this category is a little bit more complicated than the other 4, because this is basically overcoming an obstacle. So kill quests are, if you have to go out and kill someone, let's say you have to go kill the sheriff because he's corrupt. That would be a disable quest. You go out there, you disable them. You might have to return with something. This also goes to, maybe you have to make someone go unconscious, or that would be a disable quest because you're disabling them. Or this could be objects, like overcoming a trap, or any other kind of object. So it's basically overcoming obstacles. Any questions about the 5 basic quests? They're pretty simple, and I'd love for someone to challenge my 5 quest breakdown. I'll take another drink of my beer. So I'm guessing no questions related to the 5 basic quests. So I will move into using the quests. So basically, there are two things: quest modifiers, and then linking the quest. Let's for quest modifiers. Let's take a escort quest, for example, where you, like, say you have to escort the merchant to the city. Technically, that is a delivery quest. You add the defend modifier on top of that because you have to defend them along the way, which equals an escort quest. So the basic quest is a delivery quest because you're delivering the person to the city. Then let's say you want to add a time modifier to it. So let's say the delivery quest says you have to deliver the merchant to the city within 10 minutes. So not only do you have to defend the merchant while he's being attacked, you have to get them there within 10 minutes. So that's kind of how quest modifiers work. And I have not created a list of all the different quest modifiers, but you can take some quests and modify them with other quests, but those are modifiers. For example, the defend modifier is very similar to, well, almost exactly like the defend quest. However, the main quest is an escort quest, and you're adding on the modifier of a defend quest. So basic quests can be used as modifiers, but there is a slight difference, and if you get into the technicalities of it in the minutia, it matters. If you're just not into the details, then the idea of calling it a modifier might not feel appropriate to you. But that's how I view it. So, any question about using modifiers to affect quests? Nope. Okay. So, linking quests. Um, very simple. Like, let's say you have to attack a fortress and hold it. You're adding an attacking quest, which you attack the building and you get the building. Then the next segment of the quest is you have to defend it. So that's linking two different quests because there's like actual like steps along the path. So it's not a modifier because you're moving on to another section. So you can think about it as like segments in a chain. And that's how you link quests. Then you can get even more complicated in linking quests with quest modifiers. That's when you get into the more interesting stuff. So taking the previous example of attacking a castle and then holding the castle, you might say that you have to hold the castle for 5 or 10 minutes. So you'd be an attack quest where you take over the castle, and then a defend quest with a time modifier where you have to hold the castle for 10 minutes. And that would be linking quests with quest modifiers. Any questions about that? I mean, we'll get into the more complicated bit here in a minute, but that's the basics. All right, we'll move on to the next bit. Uh, Actually, linking the stories and the quests, and this is where it ties back into the different approaches that I had taken. Because you take when you're building like a whole quest line, you take whatever approach, the micro approach or the macro approach to creating the story and the mechanics for a longer quest. So when you take the micro approach, you're creating the mechanics and you're adding the story to explain the mechanics. So you're looking at the nitty gritty details. Maybe you have like it'd be really cool if the adventurers did X, Y, and Z. So you combine all your quests, you link them, you apply the appropriate modifiers in the segments, and you have what you think is a fun game design. And then you can go on and explain that through story to make it a proper, more roleplay quest, so it's not just mechanics. And that would be the basic macro approach, working from the inside out. Now, that was the micro approach. Now, the macro approach, you might like create the story for the campaign or the quest before you actually create the quest. I mean, you might have like you want the adventurers to do X, Y, and Z. However, your approach is story driven, so you create the story about what you want the adventurers to do. You create like the NPCs, and you create the world however detailed you want to get into it about what the adventurers are going to encounter. And then you build a quest on top of that. And so you make the system fit the story rather than having the story fit the system. And that would be the macro approach. Generally speaking, you'll mix the different approaches. You'll like work on mechanics and story at the same time. So you might take a basic quest idea, story-wise, like a couple sentences or like a thesis statement about this is what I want to achieve with this quest. And then you add some mechanics on top of that. And then you expand on the story. And then you might find you need to add some more mechanics. So then you add a little bit more mechanics and you add story to those mechanics. And you just keep going until you've exhausted your ideas and you think you've created what you think is a fun adventure. Any questions about the approaches when making quests? Like I said, this applies more than just LARP. This can be any creative endeavor, which I'll talk a little bit more later. But I find it's pretty universal and it's fun to get into the ideas of game design. You can apply this to video games if you really want to. Maybe you could create if-then statements if that's your approach, or you can create trees of if-then statements. So if you're more of a visual person, especially if you want to make branching quests, it's very important to write out your how your story evolves when you create a quest, so you can try to encounter any problems you might see and fix them before adventurers break your quest, because that's liable to happen, especially in a LARP or a pen and paper game where it's interactive. So I thought I would go into a small example of doing a quest using these approaches and the 5 basic quests and some quest modifiers. So I want the adventurers to go to Castle Wyvern and retrieve the Orb of Chaos and return it to King Thelios. The problem is the Horde of Chaos is also hunting down the orb. This sounds like a simple acquisition quest, and honestly, you'll have your broad this is what you're doing quest idea, but when you break it down to the different steps, that's when you get into the segments. So this example is an acquisition quest, but it breaks down into smaller quest segments. So we'll break it down into the linking quest and adding quest modifiers. So for this quest, there are 3 segments. The attack quest, which is you attack the castle. Then the second segment is a defend quest with a time modifier. So you're defending the castle for 5 minutes while you're hunting down the orb that's in the castle. So then you can leave the castle. So you just have to hold them off while you're searching. In game, this could be done completely different ways. You could have like just saying the 5 minutes, one person is setting off to the side. They are looking for the orb while the other people are defending the castle. You can think of various different systems to emulate looking for the orb, or you don't have to emulate a system for looking the orb, and you just make it a 5-minute defend quest, and you say at the end of the 5 minutes they found the orb, and they can leave. Then the third part is returning the orb to King Thelios, and that is a delivery quest. So you could make it more complicated and add a defend modifier to this, so if the horde is chasing after them, they might have to defend themselves while they are delivering this orb to Thelios. So that creates a basic quest, linking 3 quests, adding 1 or 2 modifiers to it. Any questions? Any questions about that? It's actually going a little bit faster than I expected. Hopefully, I'm being thorough. Time to open up another beer. So for the actual content of this broadcast, moving into my final thoughts of the basics of quest design. So when you get into the nitty gritty and you start working on building quests, and if you take these approaches and this game design principle, you might start finding patterns. As I mentioned earlier, like quest modifiers are also considered basic quests. So, like for example, a defend modifier could be applied to an acquisition quest, but defend is also a base quest. But when you add a base quest to another quest, it's often a modifier, and you can stack modifiers. You can't. I guess the takeaway is you can't stack basic quests on top of itself. What happens is either you're adding modifiers or you're linking quests to make a larger, simplified quest. And then quests are basically just objectives. So a lot of these basic quests are also like battle games, like defend a point, attack at a point, deliver a person to X point, or deliver object to X point, or defend quests where you defend, then maybe you switch team or switch sides, and the other team defends while you're attacking. So there's attacking and defending. So a lot of these basic quests are also battle games by themselves. And you can add multiple objectives, multiple quests to create just a battle game. I wouldn't get too complicated with it. I would only set 1 or 2 segments for a battle game. I am going a little bit into battle game design here, but you don't want to get it too complicated for battles. Quests, you can make it complicated. You still have to make it accessible, but you can make it complicated. This also, as I was saying earlier, not just for LARPs. Writing. The initial approaches I use for writing a lot. But you can create a story just through writing the game design. Like the hero's journey is just a very long quest. And so if you really want to, you could take the approach where you map out the quest for the hero before you even apply story. So you could, like, you might say the quest example I gave earlier, where you're attacking a keep, defending a keep, then delivering an item. That could be a story. You could apply story mechanics to that and just make it a short story, or you can make it even a novel. I mean, the 3 quest basics probably wouldn't be a very good novel, but it might be a good short story or a chapter for a larger novel. So breaking down into the basic categories works for more than just LARP, if you want to take this approach. I have honestly never taken the basic quest approach to writing a story, but I can see me wanting to try that sometime, especially for a short story, because I have problems writing short stories. I just keep going on and on. But if I say this is the actual, like, this is what he does, this is what that person has to do, and then the actual ending through creating a game design, I might be able to successfully write a short story for once. So I will try that in the future. Any questions about any of that? I'm guessing not. Let's take this quest going on in the background on the video here. And this is kind of a themed battle game more than it was a quest, but it could be considered, they considered it a quest. And went on for about 40 minutes. The goal of the quest was to take all the points and stop the monsters from spawning. I forget the story behind that, but that was the mechanics of it. So it was a kind of an attacking quest, and with and then a defend quest. So first you had to attack a spot, clear it. Then you had to defend it while you are removing the the taint from the area, or however they explained it. And that was adding a time modifier. So I believe the count was 30 seconds to cleanse an area. It was also actually an escort quest, because you could escort this old man that would cleanse the area faster than the players could. So they added lots of different modifiers to a basic two quests, attack and defend. And the game lasted like 40 minutes. So just something as basic as two simple quests combined to create something that was fluid, uh, and it lasted a while. People generally had fun, from what I remember. Anyone else have any questions about breaking down quests? We can talk about um, quest ideas that you might have had, or quests that you've encountered that you're not sure if it fits into any of these categories, and you want to try and break it down to understand how it was designed. Because we're done with the lecture aspect of this talk. I went through all my notes a little bit faster than I expected. Anyone joining me in the drinking by chance? Because I know Lena's putting. Oh, question. What common mistakes do you see in quest design, and how would you do better? So then there's another question. When incorporating monsters, what's your suggested route for ensuring that they are not overpowering the players too much? Okay, so I'll take the first question first, because it was submitted by Gustav. What are the common mistakes you see in quest design, and how would you do better? A lot of the things I see wrong with the quest design is they don't get inventive. It's okay to do a basic quest, but balancing it, because adding balance on top of this, because you add the monsters and NPCs and stuff like that. A lot of the biggest problem I see is balancing it so the players have a fun time, not get exasperated. And I like seeing player agency and some choice involved. So even if it's just small, making a if-then tree or multiple steps, so they don't just overrun something and make it just a battle game. So I think the biggest mistake I see is not focusing on the game design aspect. People want to tell a story, which is very important. But the quests I have seen that were not so good, they overreached. They wanted to tell a story. They wanted to make these convoluted rules, and when it gets convoluted and you have too many steps, or the steps aren't clear, especially when the steps aren't clear, you just find that players get frustrated. So you have to, one, you have to be very clear with your game design. Lock down the system. That's very important. Second is, when you have steps, you make them clear. You find a way to explain them, and you try to do it in game if possible. But you should also set out at the beginning of the game, you should talk about mechanics to the players. You should say that you're going to encounter X, Y, and Z. In broad terms. Not you have to say you're encountering a dragon, you're encountering a goblin. You don't have to get into that, but you want to explain the mechanics and the the concept of the quest with the players to be clear. Not being clear to the players is another one of the mistakes that I see. A lot of players want to just go. Sorry, game designers just want to go up to the players and say, "Okay, begin." I've done that. Um, you can do that if you're very careful, but generally speaking, you don't want to do that. Same thing for battle games. It's the same principle. Honestly, you explain the battle game before you play the battle game. It doesn't ruin it for the players because they know what the objective is. Now, you don't have to tell the story objective, but you have to give them something to start out on. If you don't do that, that's another big mistake. Is just not giving the players enough information to go on because they'll get lost. And it's also smart to, if you have the chance, to have an NPC that can answer questions to help players when they're stuck. Because this is overcoming another mistake, is when you make it too complicated, players get stuck. So you have a quest NPC that can help players within the story. So, I mean, you don't want to make everything too simple, but the main objectives you want to be clear, and that is a mistake that I've seen probably the most. Those mistakes, anyways. Hope that made sense. I rambled a little bit. I almost touched on a little bit the second question that Gwen posed. When incorporating monsters, what's your suggested route for ensuring they are not overpowering the players too much? Okay, so for when I do quests, I generally say players should have a certain size in their party. And that is optimal. My go-to is 5. I'm not really sure why, other than perhaps that was my ideal number for D&D players. But from what I can tell, that's a balanced party. You can have fighters, casters, healers, and then a little bit of room for mixing how you want to set up your party. And then you incorporate the monsters based on the idea that there's only going to be 5 players per monster generally. So that's kind of like, I think most monsters in the game with a competent party, in at least in Amtgard, can be taken down with a 5-person team. Unless you make a monster that is so overpowered, it's not appropriate. Because you don't want to make something too overpowered. But generally speaking, 5 people can mob up on any single person and take out that monster. Like, I've had it happen at Shattered Kingdoms where I make this uber monster and I have Vaughn, our local sword knight, play that monster so he can fight. But a 5-person team that is well organized can just stomp that monster, no matter how OP it is. There's just too many people. So I'm not So that is kind of balancing the players versus the monsters. Now, when I get into incorporating another question, do you like to tell questers in advance about the monsters that they will be in play, or do you let them just figure it out? So, um, that's another important topic. I will, in some instances, depending on what they are, um, what the objective is for the quest, I will explain some monsters. For example, in Shattered Kingdoms, we do a theme battle game that goes into like an open questing area. For the theme battle game, I will generally say these are the monsters that you're going to be fighting, and so I want the players to not get frustrated. And when I do this, this sets the tone for the rest of the event. So last year it was Heavy Undead. So the first theme battle game that I did was Heavy Undead. So it kind of keys the players into knowing that there's going to be a lot of undead for this game. So that's the approach I take for a longer game that has multiple segments. That's going to be going for several days. But if you're talking about a smaller quest, I will, generally speaking, not tell the player specifically what monsters there are, but I will set it up so they can figure out the kind of monsters they will be encountering. There might be some surprises along the way. Surprises are fun, but I will try to make it clear early on in the encounters what type of monster you're going to play. Sometimes I will say there's, like, if I was doing a quest at a park and it was themed and I had themed monsters, I might say the theme of the monsters ahead of time. That is something I will generally do, and then people can play a list around that, because it's not fun to encounter quest or just a whole bunch of monsters in one quest that are immune to all your stuff. And if you had known that you're going to be encountering all of them, then it would not. You would have made a different spell list so you would have fun. Oh, comment. New Shatter Kingdoms. That Shatter Kingdoms will be reading the rules before driving down. Last year I only brought my assassin kit and it was the wrong choice. Uh, yes. That happened. Oh, hello, Minerva. Um, yes, you can. I think Assassin can work at Shattered Kingdoms. I mean, last year was a little rough because it was a lot of undead, so they had a lot of the same immunities. But for balance sake, we added potions and magic items that you could purchase that would overcome the undead. So that's another aspect of game design. If you add items and stuff like that, that you can help players facilitate overcoming obstacles, is you give them the means to do so. I hope that answered your question. It wasn't very clear cut. It was sometimes I'll tell them, but in general terms, I'll almost never be specific unless I'm doing the theme battle games part, like, because it's more fast paced. I want everyone to kind of understand what's going on. So I've learned to, in SK, when we're doing the theme battle game segments, I'll say these are the monsters that are there. These are the general immunities. So be aware, so they don't get frustrated. Quest, a little bit more exploration, general terms, so they can make their spell list appropriately, or change their spell list appropriately when they're allowed to, if that's possible in the quest that you're doing. So those are my approaches for letting people know about what's in the quest before they actually get to the quest. Comment by Gwen. I bought fireballs as much as I could, but I was definitely the member in the party that was sent out to figure out what was in the area and hopefully not die. It was a really good time. Well, I'm glad they had a good time, and there was an exploration aspect. A lot of SK is exploration, especially in the open world questing. It's kind of low key in a way, but then you get these moments. Hopefully, you get these moments of like extreme pressure when you encounter an actual bad guy, because they last year I heard a lot of players were having trouble with fighting the undead. I'm not sure if you did, but hopefully they were intense moments that were memorable. I learned a lot from last year that I will apply in future years, for sure. I learned something new every year, and especially when I went to the overview of the quest making, because I didn't last couple of years. I would make a quest or two or something like that. I've always been the one that makes the theme battle game segments, but the quest, Kai has done a huge job every year creating a lot of the quests. Last year, Heron did some work as well. She did quite a bit of work, honestly, and then Kai came in at the last couple months and did a bunch of work too to round out the event. Right, question: for a single day quest like KLEs or line level days, what kind of field do you prefer? Lots of trails, open areas, or a mix? Ideally, uh, I would not want to work with just a plain field. I've done that. It's not fun. Usually a plain field will have a couple trees which help. So you have like key markers. So you have areas sort of that you can work in. My favorite would probably be trails with a little bit of open area. So like meadows and stuff like that. Because if it's all just trails and forests, it gets repetitive. And you can only do so much. And you have to wait for an open area on the trails to actually have an encounter for a group. Because if it's just trails, it's hard to do group encounters because it's so narrow. Especially if there's cliff faces, which happens at SK sometimes. Luckily, no one's fell. It was really close one time. So, yeah, trails, trees, and open areas. So a mix is best because I like doing like at SK 2 years ago. One of the best moments I had for quest design was people had to go out and find an object, and it was an open questing scenario. And there were little bands of people here and there where groups could individually take them out. They're on trails. This is a more open area than I would probably prefer. But when I got to a big open field where it had monsters, I set up an encounter where it was too much for one group. I specifically wanted the adventurers to band together to defeat this encounter. It was a dragon with some kobolds. So being able to have the open field allowed me to have a bigger encounter. I think almost all the players ended up having to fight to get the object away from the dragon. So it worked out perfectly, and I loved it. And then it wouldn't have happened if I didn't have a mix of trails and open fields. Guinevere asks, what types of items do you prefer to use for terrain effects, like lava, rushing water, etc.? Um, I used to use a decent amount of terrain effects, especially darkness, and it frustrates players a lot, especially if you use it in large blanket areas and not small encounters. It's just, I'm trying to avoid them now, honestly. If you're doing it in small areas, so one group encounters a uh, terrain effect, that's okay. It's not it's not making sure it's sorry, it's not inhibiting the whole entire quest. Inhibiting, sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Um, so large area effects, terrain effects, don't generally do them anymore. It just creates hurt feelings. One thing I like is darkness. For terrain effects, I like darkness. Players hate it. I like it. Um, I haven't really used lava. I haven't really used rushing water. I've used battlements. So there's different effects by setting on the battlements. That was a terrain effect that worked well in a theme battle game. One thing I really like is or desecrated ground. So everyone who's in there is cursed, and sometimes after they leave the area, they're cursed for X amount of minutes or hours. Usually, I've done an hour after you leave the or the after you leave the area. So like an hour of being cursed. It changes up the whole mechanics in meta for the encounter when everyone's cursed. So I find that's fun, but I don't overuse it. Comment by Gwen. Oh, that's unfortunate to hear. I definitely feel like we don't use them enough in NL. Yeah, I mean, it could be because people just got frustrated. If you get Inventive and it's smaller areas for quests and not the overall quest area or a larger area or for a themed battle game, terrain effects can be useful. Like one terrain effect that I use the first year of SK was to stop people from fighting. So the main area you could cast anything over first level, anything under anything over first level was suppressed, and basically it was a safe zone with some mechanical rules to it. So that's an okay large area, and people are usually okay with that because people like the idea of a safe zone. I have never used that since the first year of Shatter Kingdoms, and everyone always thinks it applies to the main hall, which is funny. So if they believe that's the case, that's great. But I always try to have an in-game reason for that, and the only in-game reason I could have was a social field put up by an Archmage the first year. I might make it more official later on, but it's really nice that people just learn that so well that they just assume it applies. Thanks for the engagement. I appreciate it. I didn't want to stop talking anytime soon because I got a lot of information, but I'm better at Q&A than I am lecture, I think. Minerva, did you have any questions for quest design or anything like that? I know you missed a lot of the discussion, and so if there was any questions about quests that you had, I would love to answer them. Gwen said, I've never really done any quest writing, so it's good to hear something. Yeah, I'm glad I was able to help. Like, I didn't have anyone teach me this stuff. It just came through being creative in playing RPGs and reading books. You know, the general just like the soak up knowledge kind of idea. For the world building initial approaches, the micro and macro approach, I did read that in a writing book. So I won't claim to have created that myself, but it made me reevaluate all of my creative writing and how I approach it. And so I like to share that information. So Gustav asks, are there any specific monsters or monsters' abilities you like to avoid using? Um, not not really. When I do monsters, I use the Dorn Avatar in Amtgard, and I usually just pull for the monsters they have there. But if I want kobolds, I just, what does a kobold do? And then I just modify, like I modified Goblin. So I don't really avoid using any specific monster or any specific immunity, because Amtgard is pretty rules heavy when it comes to combat, like class game combat, and there's counters for just about everything. Like it could make a monster that is immune to everything that would really annoy some people, but a group of 5 people could take out like Vaughn. Generally, like a decent group. They don't even have to be decent at fighting. They just have to be organized, and they can get hits in on someone. So I don't really shy away too much from any specific ability. Like Iron Will, I use that a lot because I don't really want my monsters to just be frozen. But if the monster isn't immune to that, like logically, I'm not going to use it. So I think players can overcome just about any of the in-game door avathon. Not, I guess, the door avatar is different than in-game, but any of the rules set out by the door avatar and abilities set up by the door and avatar, I think any player could pretty much overcome. And so I don't feel bad about putting that in to most quests, unless it's a smaller group. I'm talking about for SK, obviously, in this case. For smaller groups, I would actually avoid Iron Will, because sometimes that would just make someone completely useless. Let's see. Guinevere said, I did some quest type battle games when I was Duchess of IO. We had one where you had to farm vegetables while keeping the enemy villagers away. Yeah, I've seen that being done, especially in IO. I think the last time I was there, you had to score points by picking up um, balls, little ping pong balls. And Moses got really into it, and he was like, "I'm a farmer. I'm gathering things." And um, so those theme battle games, like you're talking about, work well, and there's like a good middle ground between doing a quest and a battle game. Honestly, I think if the battle game designer is creative, they can easily come up with a couple sentences to make a battle game more engaging. I think that LARP in Amtgard is light, and quests aren't the main, obviously, but there could be more story involved with Amtgard to make it feel more like a LARP, because we are playing characters. Even just a battle game, that is a LARP. You might not be super heavy roleplay, but you're playing a character. You have you have inhuman abilities, and generally people, I mean, they're not mages, they're not druids, they're not scouts, so they can play these characters in these roles, even if it is League of Legends style games. Now, if you add the theme battle games, and most battle games can be themed, you just like say, well, you're defending this, or you're stealing X object, and you have to keep it at your base because it powers your village, or right? Come up with anything to make people have motivation to play in these games. And I think I would like to see more of that. And it sounds like you're doing that up in IO, which is good. Let's see, Guinevere said, I bought plastic vegetables, made rows, and laid out an area where they couldn't farm if the enemy crossed the line. That's good. It adds more immersion, especially with the plastic vegetables. And I'm sure people had a lot of fun. I know IO is more stick heavy, and honestly, I prefer that when I'm actually playing. But um, I'm sure they really got into that because they had some kind of reason for doing the things that they were doing. That really does help. And so I guess you haven't done any quest writing, but doing a themed battle game is halfway to actually getting there. Gwen said IO, which is Inland Ocean, if I didn't say that earlier, uh, park in Everett in Washington. Uh, IO is really funny land. We definitely, and then she said oops. So I'm guessing she's typing something else out. Ah, Gwen says, we are heavy in fighting realm, but almost half of our players participate in really heavy LARPs. Yeah, and I kind of like that. I talked to some people from IO about their LARPing experience, which helped me create the quests that I've created. Was talking with them, especially, oh my goodness, I can't remember his Amtgard name. Anyways, so talking to people that have played the heavier roleplay LARPs, who play Amtgard for the fighties. Yes, it was Killian. Gwen, thank you. I talked to Killian not last year, but the year before he came down. He enjoyed Shadow Kingdoms because he plays heavy. A lot of the other LARPs like Shadow Cord. I think he plays also. Um, he goes to Pickling, which is huge, and I kind of like to go there, but I feel I would be out of place. But it would be really fun. Pickling is a week-long camping event in Canada where they basically have a bunch of different companies, like thousands of people, a couple thousand people, just in super awesome garb, makeup. They look like orcs or elves or whatever they're playing, and they have company battles and pitch battles, and it's just a week-long LARP, and you're supposed to stay completely in character. Like, I'm not into big LARPs, but I think it would be really awesome to experience that. It'd be hard for me to stay in character and wouldn't wear any makeup or anything like that, but it would be fun. Anyway, so that's the kind of things the IO people have been into, but they go to Amtgard to fight because Amtgard is a really good film fighting sport. But yeah, talking to Killian 2 years ago, he had a lot of input on our item creation system that we had started that year, and so it changed it for last year, and I think it went a lot better thanks to his input and his experiences. I really have been trying to get the people from IO to come down to Shatter Kingdom so they could experience a Amtgard role-playing event, because it's very few in Amtgard where there's a campout that is roleplay centric. I'm not going to get into bashing events, but the only other event, there was something called Nobblander, which wasn't meant to be a role playing event. It was, from my understanding, you get missions, escort quests, and it was like company stuff where it was just system mechanics, and then people role played on top of that. They didn't initially create role play with the event. It just happened naturally because they set up scenarios and situations which cause players to talk with people and to try to solve things through non-fighting. And so that was really good, and that's known mistakenly, I think, as a roleplay event, although they roleplayed. Shatter Kingdoms, I try to foster the roleplay and make situations for them to roleplay. So it's the approach is different. There was Rosewood. It's was heavy roleplay centric. It's less so now. Um, but that's all I'm going to say about Rosewood. Oh, Gwen says in Viridian Outlands there was one called Sergeant's Corps, and it was amazing. It was my favorite campout when I first started, but the group that ran it fizzled out. It was very much like SK, only you didn't have sign up as a group or anything. Oh, I have never heard about that. How long ago were they doing that? And what? Who was doing it? I mean, do they not? Do none of them play anymore? How many years ago? I want all the information about that because I'm guessing Amcard is huge, so there could be other small RP events that I've never heard of. Especially since I haven't heard of that, and that's in my backyard. That's the Northwest. Um, Gwen says, "Oh gosh, I think the last one was around 8 years ago." Yeah, I was not paying attention to VO very much back then. Honestly, I don't pay too much attention to them now. Sir Blackthorn from Stormhaven was the main person who ran it. That name's familiar. I almost guarantee that I have seen him at some point, but I don't know him. So I guess I wouldn't reach out to him. Gustav says Shiny. I don't know Shiny. Gustav knows more people than me. Also, Blackmore's father. Gustav, why didn't you tell me about this RP event if you knew about it? It's Gwen says he had a group they called Sergeants. Oh, Sergeants, and they were the only ones who could run it. Oh, okay. So it's basically a small group, fizzled out. I mean, Shatter Kingdoms is a small group. I'm just trying not to have it fizzle out. Gustav says he never went to one. I guess I'd explain why Gustav has never told me about it. But yeah, SK is it's not ran by a group. It's ran by me and one of the founders, Kai. But Kai has been busy with life stuff, so she hasn't been able to help as much. So I try to create a bigger team, but it's hard. It's hard for me to trust people. I can't give someone a major role without having tested them before. So it's a ramp up process for me. This last year before we had canceled, I had Cormac and Darb helping with quests, and I was going to be taking a bigger role in quests because after last year I did not get involved with quests nearly enough, and people were asking me questions, and since I wasn't like in the middle of like writing those quests, I wasn't able to answer those questions a lot, so I had to turn people to Heron or Kai because they were the ones that wrote those quests. So I'm going to be more involved this next year. So it's hard to create a big team, and like I'm not sure I'll ever get to the point where I want to hand it off to someone to the kingdom because I want to ensure my legacy. I will get to the point where I will just this is the story for the year. This is the outline. Make it, and not have me actually be the autocrat and trust someone to do all the other little work, organizing everything. But I'm not there. I would like Kai to do that. I was trying to train her to do that, but life came up, so that didn't happen. Because I'd like to have a year or two where I am not the driving force behind the Campout, because it's been 5 years now, and this would have been our sixth. So having a break would be nice. Gwyn says, 1 year Sergeant's Corps had the main monsters as a Hydra, and they had an alliance company literally tied together as the heads of the Hydra, running around the White Siege, around with White Siege, which is an insta-kill ability, by the way. It was wild, and one of my favorite memories for sure. Super memorable. That's good. Uh, Hydras can go back and forth. I've used double-headed monsters or multi-headed monsters. I've never tied them together. That would have been interesting. But it definitely makes it interesting. Uh, oh, I guess I also avoid melee siege. They took that out in 8th edition of Amtgard, and thank God. I used that once in SK for a big bad monster, and it just caused so much havoc. So that's one ability. I guess going back to a question that Gustav asked, that's one ability I will not see return to any event that I do. Melee siege is a bad idea. Gwen says, I hope SK makes a bigger and better comeback next year. I'm sure it'll be the best one yet. I hope it will be. We have a lot more time to generate the story. I created a date system specifically for one of the quests, so now Shatter Kingdoms has a calendar because of the next event. So that was inspirational, and I've been working a lot more creating lore and background this last year. Not all of it will apply to next year's Shattered Kingdoms, but ever expanding the world. Hopefully, people will read the things that I post because there's little hints here and there about everything. If I write about it, it's going to happen in the game sometime, almost guaranteed. So I hope it's going to be bigger and better. Right now, we're a little slow on making content just because of the whole world stuff going on right now. It zapped people's creativity and makes them not necessarily want to engage on creative process because they have more strenuous things to worry about. Gwen says more supplies and items can be made too, garb or whatever. Yeah, I mean, honestly, we can't pay for that. We can get donations, that'd be great. But we're so bare bones right now because prices have skyrocketed. We're going to have to increase to $45 for the next event, and that just makes it easier to run. It doesn't make it easier to get supplies. Last year we ran on a lot of donations. People kept, like Degar made, and Jennifer Kismet, that's her Amcor name, made all the potions and made a lot of the trinkets, and it was wonderful. They didn't donate it to the Shadow Kingdoms. They brought that and then they took it home. So, which is perfectly fine. It's their stuff and they paid for it and they put the time and effort into it, and I think that's appropriate. And they'll be willing to bring it next year. But we can't really afford the garb like I wanted. I mean, if we were like Dystopia Rising and we're charging $60 a head, I could actually start creating garb and trinkets and stuff like that. We have some stuff. We have a couple boxes of Shadow Kingdom stuff, but actually creating physical items is not financially viable. Let's see. Gwen says, have you guys considered doing mini SK days to build up upon the story before the event and build interest? Yes. First year, we did that. I wanted to continue that. And maybe this year we'll be able to, depending on when quarantine goes away. I actually planned a rain-long quest I wanted to do at Silvermoon that was group-orientated, that was like a prequel to Shadow Kingdom, something that happened thousands of years before the events that are currently taking place, just so we could build up a lot of lore and stuff like that. So I've definitely thought about doing mini SK days. I want to do that. I actually wanted to go up to Northern Lights and do that too. But it's hard to get the people involved with running the campout to have the time to do that right now. It's just one of the many things that I want to do with Shadow Kingdoms that we are unable to do currently. Unless I do it all myself, and I've learned that's a bad idea because burnout. So it's definitely something that's been on my mind. Other things that we had to drop, theme contest. There's just not enough interest, so we had to I want to revisit those and retool them, because I had really grand designs for Shadow Kingdoms where we'd do everything a normal campout would do, but it would make sense within the quests. We learned that doing tournaments is not a good idea. It slowed down the day, and while we did have Degar doing a herald role, they were doing bets stuff and everything I wanted to. It just turned out to not flow with the event. Gwen says we should do a GoFundMe or something for SK to make it more fancy. I would love to do that, but I'm just not sure there's enough people with money willing to donate. If I am proven wrong, that would be great. But if I have like a large thing I want to do, I would consider that for a GoFundMe. I'm not sure I'd want to spearhead that, because I kind of got burnt out on GoFundMes and donation drives. But if someone else had the energy and the drive to do that for Shadow Kingdoms, that would be great. And I'd love to expand the group of people working on Shadow Kingdoms. I know Julia, Wolfsbane, and Silvermoon wanted to donate a bunch of garb to Shadow Kingdoms, which I hope she's able to do, because I'd love to have the extra garb. So if people want to donate, that'd be great. Gwen, if you want to talk about that later with me, and if you're interested in spearheading something like that, that would be great. Just message me later. Gwen has said, I think tournaments take away from the idea of SK for sure. Keep it roleplay only. It's one of its kind. Yes, the idea with the tournament, and maybe I'll revisit it someday, but the idea was to engage roleplay with the tournament by betting with people and doing odds and making an actual gambling event. And the first time I wanted to do it, I actually wanted to have some lords and ladies or other noble people there with quest hints where people could mingle and talk to that were watching. But the reality of the event, it just didn't turn out that way. I thought it'd be really interesting if people like devised a system for cheating in the tournaments to gain more money by betting. That's why the tournaments were not classified as available for Orders of the Warrior, because I wanted them to be manipulated. But no one actually manipulated them at all. Gwen says, "Oh, that's interesting. Reminds me of the Gladiator games that happened at NLCC years ago. I wasn't there for that, but I mean, it sounds like the principle's the same. So, yeah, I mean, just the reality of it didn't pan out. If I like Feast of Mars, they do an interesting Gladiator like game where it's kind of like a big team meat grinder, which would be interesting. People watch that, they get really involved. There's a herald, there's role play, um, but it's not, but it's team based, so it's more interactive. So it's probably more fast paced and people more interested more. So I mean, maybe varying the tournament and make it more interesting. I might revisit it at another SK, but not anytime soon. There's other things I want to do before trying to work in a tournament again. But I think it can be done. Are there any other questions or comments, observations? I'm really liking the conversation that we've been having so far. As to the video, for sure. Also, the longer on here, the more I drink. Gwen says, I really like how SK included races into the campout. It's a neat quirk to give extra abilities without making players spend gold. Yeah, I really like the idea of races. It's how Amcor tried to do it in the test phase by doing look the part, but with quest ability but with monster abilities. It was broken because of the breadth that they took, like the amount of stuff they tried to cram into the game. I basically set out a list. These are the monsters that you can play. This is what makes sense for the players to be able to play. These are the only monsters that you can play. Then you can take a quest ability to play the monsters. So you don't have to spend gold. You don't have to use looks apart. And it gives people the option of doing more and feeling like they can play their character. But I don't like that freeform aspect of Amp-Guard roleplay, so that's why I kept the monster choices or the race choices very pared down to like playable civilized races. So I don't want someone doing half vampire, half dragon, lich, demon lord, and saying this is my character. Like, because I don't want them to gain statistic advantage. I mean, they can say all that stuff, and if you want to roleplay that, you can in SK, but you don't get any special abilities for it. There's only downsides because if we do that and you are adamant about that, then the people should react accordingly. Like half dragon, vampire, Draco, Lich, Demon Lord shouldn't be in the tavern. That's just not what should happen in Shadow Kingdoms. Gwen says, I was so stoked to be an elf. I got the tape to make ears and create them every morning. It's the most roleplay I've added to my game since my early years. That's great. I'm glad I was able to reinvigorate that. Like, I roleplayed in my early years too, and I kind of trying to recapture that for people. Like, I'm never going to be huge into roleplay, like live action roleplay, but being able to create a system where people can feel like they can dress up and be goofy and play another character and like be an elf when they're a human. I like doing that. So it looks like we might be getting to the end of the stream. If there's no more questions or comments or anything like that, I've drank only 1 4/5 of a beer. I was hoping to drink more. Oh, Gwen says, I used to dress up as a pirate all the time, but at my first park, every Halloween, we did a monster bash where if we dressed the part for a monster, we got to pick a few abilities and use our normal class. It's definitely a throwback. Nice. I'm glad you're able to experience that again. I like hearing stories about people. I like to hear stories about people enjoying the game, especially with content I create, because I don't get very much feedback, honestly. People don't talk about this stuff very often. It's usually a small circle. Perhaps it's my personality and people don't want to approach me, but I like knowing people enjoy the content I have. It keeps me going. Because if I had no feedback at all, I would find doing this on a regular basis difficult. Gwen says, thanks for all the info, Baelnorn. Oh, you're very welcome. Like I said, if you have any questions or you want to talk about this anymore, just send me a message. If you're watching on YouTube, watch or go ahead and post a comment and I'll reply. I'm not sure what the next topic will be, but we'll definitely do a beers with Baelnorn again next month. I'll probably reach out to some people for ideas for the topic. And if you have ideas for the topic, please post them in the comments below or reach out to me. I like knowing what people want to hear about, and I have a lot of information I don't always get to share. And so, if people are eagerly awaiting knowledge, I would like to give that to them. I'm also thinking about doing a 3 times a week stream that is playing video games, but also talking about Amcard. I hope to start that in the next couple weeks. I ordered a nice mic. Hopefully, it'll make me sound better. I don't think there's too much problems with my current mic, but I spend a little bit extra anyways. So, if you want to join me for those and just BS and watch me play video games, I'll dress up my Amcard garb and talk shop. So, I'm trying to be as accessible as possible. So, I will see everyone later. Goodbye.